that want to give ourselves is to provide a decision foundation for the people that have to take decisions. So we're trying to curate the future by providing inputs, facts, structured solutions, also ideas, but it's not that we're coming from a top-down view and impose on people on what they have to do.
In this episode, I'm talking with Stephan Sigrist, author and founder of the think tank W.I.R.E, the web for interdisciplinary research and expertise, a platform that provides an interface between science and practice. I'm Susan Kish. I'm the host of the We Are ETH podcast. Stephan, I understand you're not in Zurich and you're not in London. You're in Munich?
I'm actually in Munich.
Fantastic. So tell me, we met back in, I think, 2007, 2008. I was in Zurich. I was very proud to be an early board member for W.I.R.E when it was just sort of a twinkle in people's eyes. What have you been doing for the last, 15 years?
That's a very good question. And in many ways, it doesn't feel as so many years have actually passed.
I completely agree. You blink and it goes.
This is the case. So basically, or in many ways, astonishingly, the DNA of W.I.R.E, the reason why we founded it, believing that there is a need for a link between science and business that provides or that enables organizations and people to think long term, that is still the same. It hasn't changed at all. I would even say that the need for this type of work has even increased, looking at all the different changes, technologies that are moving into our lives. And at the same time, many things have also changed. When we started in 2007, kind of the systematic approach into looking into the future, trying to do that as far as possible with a scientific method. At the time, many people thought, this is just a funny thing to do. Some people might find it interesting. It was a bit pre-digital. So we've been at the time working with pharmaceutical companies, with hospitals, with banks, and many of these organizations thought, it's interesting, but it doesn't really matter in regards to our business model. And then I would say with 2010, when the narrative of disruption hits, everybody thought, the world is over and everything is going to change. Absolutely. So during those 10 years between 2010 and I would say 2020, our role has also significantly changed into no longer just, bringing in new topics and trying people to convince that it is important to adapt, but in many ways do the contrary and also bring them back to the ground and strengthen critical thinking, because a lot of the trends that have been pushed that are also hypes were overwhelmed and people were insecure and afraid. So providing stability and kind of a clear angle into long-term thinking, that has become much more important over those years. But generally, to answer your question, the DNA has remained and it is still very important. And it is fun to do it.
I can imagine. So, but let's just talk about geography. When I met you, you lived in Zurich. And then, did you live in London for a few years?
Yes, we actually had a dual home strategy based in London on the one hand and in Zurich on the other.
Now, was this a lifestyle choice, or did you really, you just couldn't stay away, or the English language, or?
It was a bit of both, to be honest. There was the clear idea to get the inspiration and also access to companies, to universities from a broader angle than just Switzerland. And London in many ways has and always is and still is the perfect place for that, with a very international basis, with a lot of energy, also with, I would say, we can talk about that later, maybe in many ways, more courage by looking into things. And at the same time, Switzerland has always been the home. It is also a great place to do that kind of work we do, because we have such a high density of large companies. We have leading universities. There's a huge amount of small companies that provide a very important part to innovative solutions. So for some time, this dual strategy has been very good. And then some private issues came along, such as kids. which then forced us or helped us to take a decision. So we are mainly active in Switzerland as a home base, but we still have international projects. And just these days, we're still active in London. So we're having selected projects that we're doing abroad, but the main activity is in Switzerland.
All right, so let me translate this to mean you lived in London for several years, you had kids, and you wanted them to go through the Swiss system, so you moved back to Zurich.
More or less in the summer, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And when did you move back to Zurich?
It was not a single moment of time. It was just a transition phase. So that was in 2011, I would say. So we've been there for 3 years, more or less, and then a bit more time in Switzerland and a bit less time in London. But until Corona at least, I was in London 5, 6, 7 times a year for different
London's
reasons.
Great. There's a handful of cities that are international, global intersections of people and countries and languages and thought. And I think London's in that group.
Absolutely. And it's not just the business or the scientific side. It's also the creativity that you'll find in music, that you'll find in art, and the courage of people to just also do things that are maybe unusual, that are a bit on the top. And I think this is just a very important part in the formula of driving things forward.
Good. Driving. That reminded me. There's this cool picture in your LinkedIn of a car that looks like the offspring of a Tesla truck and a sedan, right? In front of a street that looks like it could either be in Zurich or in someplace in Germany. Can you tell us what that picture is?
Yes, it is actually a DeLorean. So that was
DeLorean. Oh my gosh!
That's the car that many people know from the movie Back to the Future.
Yeah, of course.
And I happen to own one of these cars, or we have it with W.I.R.E.
You happen to own? You don't just happen to own. You had to search out for the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to say, or I have to admit, I don't say that often in other places, but I've always been into cars. I think my first words were actually not the names of my parents, but I could name a lot of British and American car brands.
There goes a McLaren.
Yeah,
There's an Audi. It's a BMW.
More or less. And so, yes, I came to the conclusion, or I developed the passion for cars that kind of play outside of the average side of things. And I've always liked the DeLorean for many reasons. There's an aesthetic part with this very sleek and simple design, but most of all, it's been a car that has been developed with a very big vision. So the founder of the DeLorean Motor Company, DMC, he wanted to build a car that actually provided a part to a more sustainable world, as the motor was very small compared to the other American cars at the time.
When was this?
They launched the car in 81. The first car in 81 and the last one in 83. So it was a very short time when they actually existed. Cool. The other thing is there was a social aspect to it. So he made a contract with the government in the United Kingdom, specifically in Ireland. Mm-hmm. So the car actually was built in Ireland with Irish workers because they wanted to bring in value and give jobs to people. So
was he Irish himself?
No, he was an American. He was the manager of an American car company, and then he had this vision of kind of this ecological point, and then the design that should kind of bring the American car companies to the future. And then there was also this very strong social responsibility. Or of course, it was also a deal. He got funded by the British government to do that, but there was just much more to this car than to any other products of the time. And I've always admired, or I loved this big idea of doing things, and the car represents that. And so we decided that it would be a good fit for what W.I.R.E stands. Mm-hmm. By being forward-looking, by being different, by also providing some inspiration. And interestingly enough, when you drive around either the city or the countryside with the car, people stop, they look at it, although this is the part I like least about it. I thought nobody would recognize it. But it turns out then from policemen to tourists to children to old people, everybody loves that car because it's so different. And I think we can talk about it later, but the courage for differentiation, I've said it before, is one of the key elements that we need. And the car is kind of a symbol for that.
Very, very cool. So you decided that you just had to have one, just hanging out?
Yes, it was in Germany. A guy bought it from the US. He put some money into it so that it would actually work. And one day I drove to Cologne, wanted to drive home, but then after 2 minutes on the Autobahn, there was a loud noise and there was fire and steam coming outside of the back engine of the car. So I had to stop. Luckily, the police came, but they just took a picture and they moved on. So I had to bring the car back to the seller and then they fixed it. So now it's really stable. But it's also a bit of it's a symbol for life. So you have to keep fixing things. It doesn't work. Most of the time it doesn't work. And you have to invest time and money and passion to keep things running.
Right. Well, I like that time, money, and passion. I think that's a really good trio. You describe, and you are often described as a curator of the future, which is just a fabulous phrase. How do you structure that? You mentioned that you need a certain amount of discipline, but the future is by definition somewhere between an 8-ball and a crystal ball, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that. Not so many people have recognized it. It comes a bit from also the role that we're trying to play. There are many organizations and peoples around that are looking into the future for good reasons. And the thing is...
Every consultant ever, for example.
Exactly. Pretty much on the spot. And of course, there are methodologies that help you to structure, that help you to kind of develop a pretty precise idea about, long-term frameworks. But at the same time, it's also a fact and it's clear that we cannot predict the future. And many people misunderstand the role that we have because we're not able to come up with a precise prediction of, how much the growth rate of AI, for example, will be. You can take some assumptions and there is an Excel model that you fill in, but at the end of the day, you don't know. And it's also not the role, and it's not possible for an organization to tell everybody else what will happen. So the role that we have, or that we want to give ourselves, is to provide a decision foundation for the people that have to take decisions. So we're trying to curate the future by providing inputs, facts, structured solutions, also ideas. But it's not that we're coming from a top-down view and impose on people on what they have to do. It's more that we provide the framework and we want them to take better decisions. And it's when we stay with the image of AI or the example, it's a completely different fact if you're a media company versus if you're a logistics company. It's different if you're a large-scale international large company or if you're a small company. So there are different solutions even for the same trends, and it needs differentiation. So this is why we are not want to be seen as futurists and having this crystal ball that doesn't exist. It's more the provision of arguments to take decisions.
We talked about what WIRE, the acronym, means, but can you tell us about what WIRE actually is today and what are its services, its activities? What is an interdisciplinary think tank?
Very good question. So there's basically two main roles that we have. The one is the role of a think tank, where we try to come up with new ideas, new solutions, new topics that we as a society need to talk about. There are also topics that, of course, for companies, for universities are relevant. So this is kind of the thought leadership. On the other hand, we are approached by many organizations, large-scale, small-scale companies, public sector organizations, also universities, where they want specific advice on, how to deal with, for example, greenwashing in the area of sustainability. Or at the moment, we're working on a large study on the actual impact of AI. So basically, it's strategic foresight that we're providing. So companies, organizations ask us to help them with getting more orientation on the long term. On the second hand, and this is where the books come in, we develop long-term perspectives, thought leadership that we translate into books, where we always or often work with publishing houses, NZZ in Switzerland, Surkamp in Germany. We just did a new book in the UK with Bloomsbury on the future of clothing. So we are not doing corporate publishing, but we help organizations or companies to come up with new ideas, and we are a partner in providing critical and inspiring information. And then in the third row, we're actually helping in developing specific ideas, from innovation management to also prototyping. We developed a chocolate 3D printer some years ago. We had pop-up restaurants. We had digital devices that we were developing. So it's a huge range of, let's say, early stage offerings that we provide with a high quality and also with an independence. And what we're not doing is we're not a consulting company that, there's a strategy and then it provides a huge number of junior consultants to then implement it. We always want to be neutral, and we want to be objective and give the best advice to these organizations that work with us. And maybe what's special, we are completely privately funded. So we don't have any public money. So we're always working with companies that also aim for this long-term perspective.
Got it. And do you still publish a newsletter or a quarterly publication, or is it mainly focused on the books?
We moved away from the regular publishing of the books, also because we are having some difficulties with organizations that wanted that. So we're publishing on an irregular basis, larger books, smaller books, still a lot of them in print. And I just recently had a conversation with somebody in London. PR agent called me and said, well, it's such a great thing that you have started to print physical things, because people actually remember those, and it's such a differentiation from these PDFs. And I said, man, we've been doing that all over the time. We've never stopped. And so we still believe in the physical things, because of the topics that we want to publish. They have to have a long-term relevance. Right. So, and yes, we have digital forums and a lot of infographics that you will find on our website, but we still believe, in German you say, begreifen. So to understand something, you also need to touch it. And when we hand out the books, people often smell them. They have the haptics. And so this is part of the DNA that we will also continue.
Fantastic. It's content and form.
It's content and form.
You studied it. I think you worked at Roche, and you actually studied biochemistry at the ETH.
Did, yes.
And then worked in medical research. And I think you did your dissertation, if I understand this right, at the Collegium Helveticum. What is the Collegium Helveticum, please?
The Collegium Helveticum has been, or always still is, an institution that pioneered interdisciplinary research.
Huh.
It was founded in the 90s as a place where PhDs from different areas could actually come together for a year and spend time. And the idea was basically that these people, from literature, science to inorganic chemistry to medicine, if they would be put in a room, the magic would happen.
Right, which is one of those theories around innovation, right?
Exactly. And that worked well for some time. And then in 2004, Professor Volkers took over, and he strengthened the concept of this, I would say, structured interdisciplinarity. So he was able to convince professors from different areas, also with some funded projects. So it was not just, a room where you could come together. They had actually a budget. And over the time when he was responsible, they did some very interesting research, also, working on methodologies on how to bring people together. And I happened to be one of the first PhDs at ETH that did an interdisciplinary approach to science. And
what was your thesis?
The thesis was actually on a topic that we've just picked up last week, again, on a large conference that we did. It was on preventative therapies. So basically using drugs in a way not just to cure diseases, but to prevent them. And so it was...
That is timely.
Exactly. Formally, it was quite... I had 5 people that were looking at the work, so it was a lot. It was a bit complicated, but it turned out well. And so I'm very grateful until the day that I had this opportunity, because after to study. As you said, I went to Roche, I went to work in consulting companies, and then I lacked the knowledge. I wanted to do something more intellectual, but basically in the first place, they said, well, you can come back to molecular biology, but here's your pipettes. And I didn't want to go back to the lab. I was not good at it. And so I was looking at St. Gallen, if they could use somebody from ETH. I said, go away.
Right.
You're a
Where's
natural
your accounting
scientist.
degree?
Exactly. And the Collegium provided the perfect spot for what I had in mind. And there was I think a very similar view on where things could go together with Gerd Volkers. And so, this was also the beginning then of W.I.R.E, because it was actually possible to show that interdisciplinary research works. Mm-hmm. And we continued we used the concept of the Collegium, but not for basic research, but for applied research. So that is basically the mental stimulus that came from that work.
How did your years at ETH and the Collegium Helveticum, it sounds like that provided both the foundation and it also gave you that platform to start working in the world of interdisciplinary, connecting the dots.
Absolutely.
How did that influence your path?
Well, the basic study at ETH just provided me with that in-depth knowledge about, from mathematics to chemistry to biochemistry. And also, I think it was mainly a way to make me more resilient.
How do you mean?
It was just as
it was tough. It was too tough.
It was. No, I managed, so it wasn't too tough,
right,
but it was tough.
Fair, completely fair.
I came from a gymnasium that wasn't mainly focusing on natural sciences, so there were people from other high schools or gymnasiums that were actually much better prepared. I was coming from a philosophically oriented school, so it was actually tough. And I didn't have to go to the Swiss military because of a car accident I had. So I somehow felt that this was my military time. Just a lot of work. I learned a lot, strengthening resilience. And then I needed to move away. I didn't want to just continue on a PhD in the lab. As I said, quickly sometimes work in
Pipettes weren't your thing.
Exactly, and then kind of coming back to academia 2 or 3 years later with a completely different approach was very helpful. Also, I was working at the same time at another think tank. So
Which
I
one?
had the Gottlieb Duttweiler Institute,
GDI.
Mm-hmm. So I was doing more applied research for them, but I could use the same data for the PhD. So I had different angles to look at things, and this kind of changing of roles between academia and between more practice is something that also has influenced me until this day, and is also an element where I thought, we can actually bring that together with W.I.R.E by combining both things.
Very, very cool. Stephan, I've got a gazillion more questions, but I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the chance to catch up on this. And how cool. How cool and how important. We have a couple questions we usually ask our guests just to close off. And the first one I would ask is, when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I recently found an essay I wrote as a 3-year-old, and as a matter of fact, turns out I wanted to become a jet pilot.
Cool.
Probably I've seen Top Gun at the time. But then, honestly, I never had the specific...
I'm sorry. Did you say you wrote an essay and printed it out when you were 3 years old?
No. Sorry, it was in the third primary
grade.
school, 3rd grade.
Got it. So you're about 8 or 9.
It was 8 or 9, exactly.
Good, thank you.
But actually, I was never one of these kids that had a concrete idea. So it always was open until a long time. So I took decisions on the go.
Right. And inherently in what we've been talking about, you are curious and you continue to learn. What are you learning about today? What inspires your curiosity today?
Oh, there are so many things that there are so many links that are popping up on a daily basis. Just before our call, we had a conversation with a strategist from a large hospital, and we were talking about the difficulties in implementing integrated solutions. And it was just very obvious what role the psychological effects would play. So that's people understand concepts, but they're having a different identity. So that was one of the things that struck me again, that you can have all the strategies if you don't have people that believe in it, it doesn't work out. It's not something completely new, but it's a recurring thing I realize and I learn.
And then the corollary to that, which is, what books are you reading now? What are the books on your bedside or in your Kindle, on your phone?
Good question. To be very honest, I read a lot of magazines. So this is a lot of digital things I read because I'm just dependent on these inspirations. So there's a range from Harvard Business Review to the Wired magazine, but also a lot of, crappy things that I'll find. And actual books, I often go back to classics. So I love Friedrich Dürrenmatt, for example, for his very precise analysis of society and, how people get stuck in dilemmas. So when I get to read, I not so much read these thought leader pieces. They're often too long and too repetitive for me. And I stick to classics.
Sounds very disciplined. And when you're in Zurich, because I assume you do come here often, what's your favorite place, either in the town or by the university, to have coffee?
The boring thing is I have quite a lot of places I like, but I think actually the balcony that we have, which provides a nice view over Zurich, is
your
for some
balcony at
years,
home.
yes, is my favorite place. It kind of provides a moment to, step back and reflect on things and have some quiet. But it's one of many places I like.
I understand. Stephan, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
Wonderful to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much.
I'm Susan Kish, host of the We Are ETH series, telling the story of the alumni and friends of the ETH, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. The ETH repeatedly ranks amongst the top universities of the world with cutting-edge research, science, and people. The people who were there, the people who are there, and the people who will be there. Please subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you listen. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please give us a good rating on Spotify, on Apple, or on YouTube. I'd like to thank our producers in LA Media and our hosts at the ETH Alumni, and thank you, most of all, our guests, for listening to us today.